All right, friends, welcome back to our next lecture. Um, in this video, what we're going to be doing is taking the knowledge that we pulled from the last two videos and putting it together to really bring home and finalize our discussion of markets and supply and demand. Okay. Last video, actually the last two videos, we dissected supply and demand and we figured out how to shift them. You should know by now that for both supply and demand, there's a difference between movements along the curve, it's going to be caused by price, and shifts to a new curve, which will be caused by non-price factors. You should also know by this point and have memorized and be really fluid in understanding the different non-price factors that will shift demand curves and the different non-price factors that will shift supply curves. Because what we're going to do in this video is bring them all together, okay? So to start it off, now that we understand market equilibrium, we know that it's brought together by supply and demand, and we know that supply and demand can change, you're able to now really explore the power of supply-demand analysis on a market. Because at this point, you'll be able to understand, understand and predict market changes. We see market changes all the time. We see prices go up, we see prices go down. Now, after this lecture, you're going to be able to understand those changes and predict those changes. Now, one of the things that I really want to caution you about is yet another pitfall to good economic thinking. Lots of people will make snap judgments based on a price change. We call this reasoning from a price change. They'll see a price change and they'll think that that is the cause of something else. They begin their reasoning from the price change. You can't do that. Instead, what I want to push you to do is always take one step back, start one step earlier, and instead of reasoning from a price change, ask yourself instead, what caused that price change? What in the demand side or the supply side, or maybe both sides of the equation, brought about that price change, okay? So again, good economic thinking is not reasoning from a price change. Instead, it's taking one step back, getting a little bit deeper and asking what happened in this market? What happened to supply and demand to bring about this change, okay? So that's what we're gonna do today. What I'm gonna share with you is a pretty straightforward four-step, kind of step-by-step plan to help you with your market analysis, okay? So the first step that you're going to take is you're going to identify the event. Usually I'll give you this, but you're going to identify the event. Make sure you really understand the event. Once you know the event, you have to identify which curve the event affects. That's why knowing those supply shifters and those demand shifters and keeping them separate in your head is so critical. So step one, what's the event? Step two, which curve does the event affect? Once you know which curve, you have to determine if the event in question will increase the curve or decrease the curve. In other words, which way? So we identify the event, we ask which curve, we ask which way, and once we have the answers to that, then the fourth and final step, you bring it all together. You draw the new curve, you find the new equilibrium, you find the new P and Q, and you interpret it. And if you follow that methodical step-by-step process consistently, it'll become second nature for you to understand and predict market changes, okay? As we do this analysis, we're gonna have three really distinct types of cases to analyze, okay? So those three cases briefly, the first one will be a simple one curve shift. Okay, the simplest type of event to analyze is where only one curve changes, either supply or demand, and the other one stays constant. Really easy way to start. Okay, once you have that, you can progress to analyzing two curve shifts. You can analyze a two curve shift, we're going to say with magnitude. Or case 3, you can analyze a two curve shift without magnitude. Now you're asking, what does this mean? What's magnitude? Well, here's what it comes down to. One curve shifts, easy. Supply changes or demand changes, not a problem. With the two curve shifts, there's two distinct types. In case 2, you have both supply and demand changing, but you understand which of the two changes is of the bigger size. Magnitude means size. So if I tell you, for example, that supply goes up and demand goes down, but the supply change is bigger, that's a two curve shift with magnitude. Okay. Or you might have a two curve shift without magnitude. That's where I would say supply goes up and demand goes down, but we don't know which curve is bigger. That third case, you have to be a little bit more careful about, because that's where you're going to have an unknown as a part of your analysis. Okay, so we have a 4-step process. We have 3 types of 4-step process, 3 types of cases. The other thing I want to share with you, I'm a big believer in staying organized when you do these. So I propose to you that every time that you have one of these questions, you do a little chart next to it. And you write S, D, P, and Q. And then you use an up arrow to indicate if the factor or the variable in question goes up, or a down arrow if it goes down, or a 0 if it stays constant. You do that, that'll help you stay organized. And again, I'm going to encourage you on top of that to always, always take the few seconds to draw out your supply and your demand curve and to start there, okay? It only takes a few seconds to draw it out. S0, D0, supply and demand, they meet here at point 0 with equilibrium price and quantity. You would be shocked as to how many students in my classes consistently blow the midterm or blow the final, and when they come in to talk about it, I look at their papers and there's no drawings. I said, well, how'd you figure this out? Well, it was in my head. Yeah, well, your head's messed up because you got it wrong, okay? These things can be really confusing. So I encourage you, take the extra few seconds to sketch out a quick supply and demand, follow the 4 steps, keep your little table here, and you'll be golden, okay? With that said, let's jump in. Case number 1, shifts in one curve only. And I have given you here the 4 different cases. We have a decrease in demand, we have an increase in demand, we have a decrease in supply, we have an increase in supply, okay? In this little graphic that I found for you, not only do we give you the actual supply and demand analysis, but over here, we also tell you all the different events that could happen to manifest that curve changing in that direction. So a nice little way for you to kind of keep yourself organized and to also keep thinking about this and growing your skill set as you memorize these shifts, okay? Let's start off here with case number 1. So we're going to do D, S, P, and Q. Now the analysis is done for you, but I'm going to repeat it for you and I'll write on top of this so you can really lock it in, okay? Later on in this video, I'm going to expect you to solve these on your own without going through it with me, okay? So case number 1, we'll call this 1A, a decrease in demand. So we know that demand is going down. We know that supply is staying at a 0 because it's not changing. We would start off this with our original supply and our original demand and our original equilibrium, Okay, and we would have equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Okay. Then we would have our decrease in demand, which would manifest as a leftward shift in demand. You see they give you the arrow there. Critically, we go to a new equilibrium. Remember, supply and demand form equilibrium. If one of the curves changes, the original curve is dead and the original equilibrium is dead, and the new curve and the new equilibrium are what we're going to analyze. So we're going to put in N for new, and we're going to drop it down and take it across. And we can see clearly that when demand goes down, the price goes down and the quantity goes down. And that's our first example. Okay. Let's take example number 2. We have an increase in demand. Again, demand, supply, P and Q. In this case, we see demand increasing, supply does not change. Let's analyze. We'll use blue for our original, red for our shifted. So we're going to start off here with original supply and original demand and original equilibrium. And we have our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity. We're going to have a shift to the right as demand increases. So we're going to have a shift to the right to our new curve, which we'll call, well, he calls it D2, I would call it D1. We're going to draw our arrow to make sure we really lock it in visually. We're going to identify our new equilibrium. And when we take it across and take it down, we have our equilibrium price and our new equilibrium quantity. And we can conclude that when demand goes up, both price and quantity go up. Our second case, okay? Case number 3, so we'll call this C, and we'll call this one D. Case C, supply decreases. Supply, demand, P, Q. Well, we know that supply is falling and demand's not changing, so we'll indicate supply falling and demand at a 0. We'll identify our original graph. So our original is supply and demand, and they meet at equilibrium. We have equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. When supply falls, it's going to shift to the left. So we have a leftward movement. We have a nice big arrow to visually lock it in. We're going to drop an N on our new equilibrium. And when we take our new dotted line down and across, we have our updated here. And we're going to see that when supply falls, prices go up and quantity goes down. Prices go up and quantity goes down. Okay. And our fourth and final one curve shift, supply, demand, P and Q. This one is an increase in supply. So supply is going to go up, demand is going to stay steady. What's going to happen to P and Q? Well, we take our original supply and demand curves at equilibrium, original price, original quantity. We're going to have an increase in supply, which is going to shift the supply curve to the right. So we draw that new supply curve there. He calls it supply 2. I'd call it supply 1, but it's the new one. We're going to draw a nice fat arrow here to show the curve, our new equilibrium, and when we drop it down and get our new Q and our new P, we can conclude that when supply goes up, prices go down in that market, and quantity goes up in that market. And there you go. You're 1/3 the way there. You take the event, you take the curve, you take the direction, and then you draw it, show the new equilibrium, compare the two, fill in your table, and you've got it, okay? So our first of the 3 cases, the one curve shift is done. Now we have to go into our second case. In our second case, as I said before, we're going to have simultaneous shifts. So we're going to have a change in supply and a change in demand at the same time. But in this case, the relative size of each one is known. In other words, we're given the magnitude, okay? Now, up here, there's a couple of panels, A, B, and C, where it kind of shows what's going on, and you can review those on your own. But basically, here's the way that you would take these. You get the event. So let's say in this case, we say that demand goes up and supply goes up. P and Q. Okay, so we're given two curve shifts, demand up and supply up. We're also given magnitude. So let's say that we're told that the demand shift is bigger than the supply shift, or the demand magnitude exceeds the supply magnitude. In that case, I'm going to put a couple of extra arrows there to really graphically reinforce that the demand curve shifts more than the supply curve. Okay? Let's start off by going to our old friend, the supply and demand graph. We drop our D0, S0, original equilibrium, P0, and Q0. Okay, easy stuff. Demand is going, let's go to a new color. Demand is going to increase, supply is going to increase, but demand is going to increase a lot more. So let's take these arrows here and let's bring them over and graphically show that magnitude with our shifts. The demand curve is going to increase a lot. We'll call this demand 1. We've got a big fat arrow there to show a really big shift. So demand has increased a lot. Supply has also increased. So it's going to shift to the right, but we're going to do a more modest shift of this. That way you can see that the big demand increase clearly outweighed the relatively smaller supply increase. Once you have that, we drop our new N, we take it across, we take it down, P1, Q1, and we can predict that if we have these two events, an increase in demand with a simultaneous increase in supply, where the demand magnitude is bigger, we're going to see prices go up, we're going to see quantities go up. And there you go. Okay, nice and easy. The key to getting these is to make sure you have the magnitude and to be really conscious that you express that magnitude graphically in both your chart and in your curves. If you do it that way, you'll have no problem because it's an easy analysis. All right, let's do one more just for shits and gigs, make sure we really get it. In that last one, we made supply and demand go up. So this time, let's make supply and demand go down, but we're going to make the supply magnitude bigger. Okay, so in this example, we're going to have simultaneous shifts in supply and demand, two curve shifting. They're both going to fall, but the supply magnitude, the supply shift is going to outweigh the demand one. Okay, how do we do this? Well, we start off by graphically putting more arrows there to visually lock it in. Now let's go over to a supply demand graph, Q, 0, and P, V0, S0. We have our equilibrium, P0, Q0. So we're set. Now let's analyze in red. Supply is going to fall, and you know that's going to shift the curve to the left. Demand's going to fall. That's going to also shift that curve to the left. But we don't know, I'm sorry, but we do know that that one's bigger, so we're going to draw it that way. So let's do a really big leftward supply shift. Real big. Really show that magnitude. And let's do a leftward demand shift, but relatively smaller, more modest. So you can see here that we've had supply fall and demand fall, but we've made the supply fall much bigger. We've simply put graphically what we had put in arrows, which is what we got from the verbal question, or on a midterm or a quiz, I give you a question and you can interpret this way. Okay, we do our new equilibrium here. We drop a line, we drop a line. We have P1, we have Q1, and we would conclude by saying that when supply and demand both fall, but supply has a bigger magnitude, prices will go up in the market and quantity will fall. And that, my friends, is our second case, simultaneous shifts where the magnitude is given. Okay, now let's jump into our final case. And this one is a bit trickier, and it's going to require you to really think, because in this case, we're talking about simultaneous shifts. So we're still going to have a change in supply and a change in demand. But in this case, the magnitude is unknown. And here's why these are a little bit trickier. Whenever the magnitude is unknown, one of your two variables, either the price or the quantity, is going to be uncertain. In other words, if you're not given the magnitudes, you're going to have to end the analysis with one variable being defined certainly and one variable being what we call in economics indeterminate. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit. You can see right here on case 3, they've given a couple of different panels. We see here supply decreases and demand decreases, supply increases, demand increases, you get it. But what I want to do is I want to do a couple together first. Let's take what we had up here. We had started off, I think it was with supply up and demand up. So let's do a case here, supply, demand, price, quantity. And let's say that supply goes up and demand goes up. So we're going to indicate with our arrows that supply and demand are both going up. But because we don't know which one is bigger, we can't indicate. We have to just assume that they're equal size. So let's do a little thing here. P, 0, and Q. Let's draw demand, supply, equilibrium, P0, Q0. Nothing new, our basic model. Now let's go to the analysis. We're going to increase supply, in other words, shift it to the right. We're going to increase demand as well, shifting that to the right. But because we're not given the magnitude, we have to assume that the shifts are the same size. You can't make one bigger than the other because you're not given that information. And if you assume it, your analysis is going to be flawed. Okay, so supply goes up. We got that one. Demand goes up. We'll do it at around the same size. We'll call that D1. Got that one too. Now let's interpret. Well, here's our new equilibrium. Comparing Q is pretty straightforward. We drop our line down and we see that Q1 is there. So clearly Q has gone up. But look at price. At the original equilibrium, right here, price was right here. But look at the new equilibrium. It's sort of at the same location price-wise as the original one. And as a result of that, we cannot say for certainty if price changes when these two things happen. So price is going to have to be a question mark. Okay? Let's repeat the analysis briefly. We know that supply and demand are both going up. Because we don't know magnitude, we increase them by a fairly equal amount. When we found the new equilibrium, we determined that one of our variables, in this case quantity, certainly increased. But our other variable, in this case price, we really don't know. So we have to put a question mark, and that would be an indeterminate variable. Okay? These are tricky. They're especially tricky because sometimes you forget what you're doing and you accidentally make one curve slightly bigger than the other curve, and then you assume that it's correct, and then you interpret it incorrectly, okay? So I've also come up with another way to attack these, and I'm going to share with you. You know, this is just something that I came up with because it worked for me, and I'll share it with you, okay? Let's go back and let's do our supply going up. Sorry, let's go back to blue. Supply going up, demand going up. And let's do a little chart here. And let's just analyze supply going up by itself. okay? If supply goes up, let's forget about demand for now, just look at supply. If supply goes up by itself, we know that price will go down. And if supply goes up by itself, we know that quantity will go up, right? If, on the other hand, demand goes up, we know that price will go up. And if demand goes up, quantity will go up. To repeat, all I've done is I've taken each event, supply going up, and found the impact on price, and then the impact on quantity. And then I took the second event, demand going up, and found the impact on price and the impact on quantity. Okay, nothing new, nothing too difficult. But now look at the analysis. The supply event pushes price down, while the demand event pushes price up. So because these two different events are pushing price in different directions, and we don't know which event is bigger, we don't know what's going to happen to price. And that's what we said here. But look at quantity. Because the supply event pushes quantity up, and the demand event pushes quantity up, because both of these events push quantity up, we know that quantity will go up. And that's what we got there as well. Okay, so you can solve these questions when there's no magnitude given by using your graphs, but I've built this little system as kind of a second check to make sure that you cover yourself. All right, let's do one more just to make sure that we get it. And once again, let's do the second one. We did supply down and demand down. We did supply down, demand down. So supply, demand, P and Q, down and down. Note that they're both falling, but because we're not given magnitude, we have to draw them equally. So let's draw it. Q, 0, P, demand, supply, equilibrium, and the corresponding equilibrium price, and equilibrium quantity. So far, so good. Now, supply is going to fall. So that's a leftward shift. So let's draw us a leftward shift. There you go. And we know that demand is going to fall. And when demand falls, that's also a leftward shift. We don't know the magnitude, so we have to draw the demand curve shift at about the same size as the supply curve shift. So that would be, I don't know, half an inch, 3/4 inch. Drop that down, and we get D1. And you can see the issue here, new equilibrium. And once again, we have one variable that's certain and one that's indeterminate. If we drop it down, it's easy to see that quantity fell. Yet when you compare the new equilibrium with the original equilibrium, you really can't tell what happened to price. So price is going to be indeterminate. Okay, once again, two curve shifts with no magnitude given. One variable is going to be certain, the other is going to be uncertain. Of course, it's very easy to screw up which one's going to be uncertain and certain if you mess up your graph. So for that reason, my friends, let's do one last little thing here to double check it. Supply down, demand down, do a little table here, P, Q. Let's identify the impact in isolation. If supply goes down, price will go up. If supply goes down, quantity will go down. If we get a supply curve shift by itself, supply falling will cause price to increase and quantity to decrease. Now let's analyze demand by itself. If demand falls, price will go down and quantity will go down. Again, I identified the impact of a drop in demand on price, it'll fall, and on quantity, it'll fall. Now, my friends, we compare. Both the supply movement and the demand movement are going to push quantity down. So we can safely say that quantity will fall, which we got. but let's look at price. The supply move is nudging price up, while the demand move is nudging price down. Since these two curves are exerting contrary forces on price, and since we don't know which is the stronger, bigger curve, we have to conclude that price is indeterminate. Okay? You can take a look at these examples up here, the 4 different panels, and double check your knowledge. But for now, that's the analysis. So we start off with a market model, and then we identify the event, identify the curve, identify which way, and then draw it and interpret it. Those interpretations will be one of 3 cases. Case 1, one curve shifts, the other stays at a 0. Case 2, both curves shift, but one shift is bigger than the other, and you know which one it is. And case number 3, both curves shift, but you don't know which one is bigger. In that case 3, we have a little kind of a way to double check our work, as it were, and make sure that we know which variable is indeterminate and which one is certain. And with that, my friends, you are now done with your supply and demand lecture, okay? You now have a really, I hope, deep idea and understanding of what a market is, of the 2 sides of the market, supply and demand, and of how those 2 sides affect the market model. We know about the change in quantity supplied versus supply and quantity demanded versus demand. And critically now, you should know all the non-price factors that will move supply and all the non-price factors that will shift demand. And then with today's lecture, you know how to put all that together to understand and predict market dynamics and price changes in markets. And with that said, my friends, I've got a couple of examples that I'm going to give you. Then I'm going to cut the video. And in our last and final video for this module, we'll go back and solve these together. So here are some questions for you to practice on. Example 1, what will happen to the price and quantity at Alejo's, a nice little pizza joint up the street, if the price of frozen Italian dinners falls? Case number 2, what will happen to the price and quantity of skateboards if the price of fiberglass, which is a substance that is used to make skateboards, rises? Example number 3, why do major term papers that students write today go through many more revisions than term papers went through back in the 1970s? Example number 4, why do the prices of some goods, like airline tickets to Italy, go up during their months of heaviest consumption, while other prices, like the price of sweet corn, go down? In other words, why during the months of heaviest consumption do some prices go in one direction while others go in another direction? Example 5, what will happen to the price of corn tortilla chips if researchers discover that eating chips makes you sexier? All right. And at the same time, a swarm of Mexican locusts destroys a part of the corn crop. We're going to assume that the sexiness factor is stronger, because why the hell not? Example number 6, based on your answer to number 5, what do you predict would happen to the price and quantity of salsa in the salsa market? Example number 7, in the 1990s, how did the outbreak of mad cow disease impact beef prices and quantities in the global beef market? And finally, not so much an example, but an application to get you thinking, all you business majors. Can you take this knowledge that we got from this module and answer this question? Why does the Gap Corporation operate Old Navy and Gap and Banana Republic? Don't know if you knew that, but all 3 of those stores, Old Navy and Gap and Banana, are all owned by the Gap Corporation. Use your knowledge of supply and demand analysis to answer the question as to why Gap would do that. Or the same question seen differently, why do most car companies offer different brands at different price points? If you can answer that question, you will have made your supply and demand knowledge real in the real world. Work on those, and we'll get together in our next video for the solutions. Good luck. Think critically. Remember your process. Remember your steps. Slowly but surely, and you'll get there. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.